Okay, picture this. I was standing there at my own wedding reception in my dream dress, and my fiancé's family, his entire family, was openly laughing at me. Not a polite chuckle, but full-blown, condescending guffaws, making jokes about my simple upbringing, my dress, even my future with their illustrious son. They had no idea who I really was. None of them, especially not my husband-to-be, had any clue about the $950 million deal that was hanging in the balance, a deal that I, and only I, had the power to make or break. And in that moment, as the snickers echoed around the lavish ballroom they'd rented with my money, I decided to break it. Was I wrong for canceling the deal that would have secured their family's future, just because they treated me like dirt? Tell me, honestly, would you have done the same thing? Let me take you back to how this all started, because trust me, it's a story. My name is Sarah, and I grew up in a small town, a place where everyone knew everyone, and big dreams felt a little out of place. My parents were hardworking, salt-of-the-earth people. My dad was a carpenter, my mom a nurse, and we never had much in the way of material wealth, but we had love, laughter, and a strong sense of community. I was a quiet kid, always buried in books, and I had this insatiable curiosity for how things worked, especially in the world of business and finance. I devoured every article, every documentary, every book I could get my hands on. It was an escape, a secret world where I could imagine myself doing something bigger. After high school, I worked multiple jobs to put myself through a local community college, then managed to get a scholarship to a state university for business. I graduated with honors. But still, coming from my background, the doors to the elite corporate world didn't exactly swing open for me. I started small in a junior analyst position at a lesser-known investment firm, and I worked my fingers to the bone. I was often the first one in and the last one out, taking on every extra project, learning everything I could. My colleagues thought I was a bit eccentric, always so focused, but I had a vision. Over the years, I climbed the ranks slowly but surely. I specialized in mergers and acquisitions, a high-stakes, high-reward field that few dared to tread. I had a knack for it, a gut feeling for profitable ventures, and an almost obsessive attention to detail. My reputation grew, not because I was flashy or networked extensively, but because I delivered results consistently and spectacularly. My biggest deals were usually conducted under strict non-disclosure agreements, and I rarely, if ever, used my own name in the public sphere. I prefer to let my work speak for itself, and frankly, I enjoyed the anonymity. I was known in certain circles as the architect, someone who could build empires overnight, but my actual identity remained a mystery to most. I built my own company from the ground up, a boutique firm that handled massive, multi-million, and even billion-dollar transactions. I had a small, highly skilled team, and we operated like a well-oiled machine, staying out of the limelight. This brings me to Mark. I met Mark through a mutual friend at a charity event. He was handsome, charming, and came from what he proudly called old money. His family, the Davenports, owned a sprawling construction empire that had been around for generations. They were well known in the city's social scene, always hosting lavish parties and appearing in society columns. Mark was supposed to be the heir apparent, though from what I gathered, he mostly dabbled in various ventures that never quite took off. He was incredibly smitten with me, or at least with the version of me he perceived. I dressed modestly, drove an unassuming car, and never flaunted any wealth. I told him I worked in finance, but kept the details vague, simply saying I consulted. He seemed to find my quiet ambition endearing, a refreshing change from the usual socialites he dated. We fell in love, or at least I thought I did. He was attentive, made me laugh, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could relax and just be myself. We dated for 2 years, and then he proposed. It was a sweet, intimate proposal, and I said yes, genuinely happy. My parents were thrilled, even if a little intimidated by the Davenport family's grand reputation. Mark's parents, however, were another story. From the moment I met them, there was an air of barely concealed disdain. Mrs. Davenport, with her perfectly coiffed silver hair and diamond-encrusted everything, barely acknowledged my presence. Mr. Davenport would ask me patronizing questions about my little job and how I planned to support Mark's lifestyle. Mark, bless his heart, would try to intervene, but his efforts were always weak, almost apologetic. He'd say things like, "Mom, Dad, Sarah is very smart," but never truly stood up for me. I brushed it off, telling myself that they just needed time to get to know me. I kept my financial success completely hidden from them, mostly because I wanted them to like me for me, not for my money or my accomplishments. I wanted to be accepted into their family, not admired for my bank account. Call me naive, but I believed in the idea of unconditional love and acceptance. I thought if they saw how much Mark and I loved each other, they would eventually come around. We started planning the wedding. The Davenports, of course, insisted on hosting a grand affair. They wanted to show off their social standing, and I reluctantly agreed, mainly to keep the peace. They took over everything from the guest list to the venue to the catering. They picked a ridiculously expensive ballroom, hired a famous band, and planned a menu that probably cost more than my entire childhood. I just wanted a simple, elegant ceremony, but they waved my suggestions away with a dismissive hand, saying, "Darling, this is how Davenports do things." They also insisted on paying for everything, which I found curious, as Mark had mentioned a few times that their company was facing some cash flow issues. But I didn't press. I just smiled and nodded, even as I secretly transferred funds from my own accounts to cover various vendor deposits that Mark's mother conveniently forgot to pay, just to prevent any hiccups. I didn't want Mark to be embarrassed. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind of veiled insults and snide comments from the Davenport clan. At the bridal shower, Mark's aunt, a woman who reeked of old money and judgment, asked me if my dress was off the rack, and then proceeded to tell me about her niece's custom-made gown from Paris. At the rehearsal dinner, Mark's cousins made jokes about my quaint parents and how they must be overwhelmed by the sheer grandeur of the Davenport lifestyle. Mark would give me an apologetic squeeze of the hand, but never once did he tell them to stop. He just let it happen. I found myself making excuses for him, telling myself he was caught between his family and me, and that after the wedding, things would change. He loved me, right? He truly loved me. I clung to that thought like a lifeline. But then came the wedding day itself, and specifically, the reception. The ballroom was stunning, exactly as they had envisioned, opulent, grand, and frankly, a bit over the top. I had picked out a beautiful, classic wedding dress, elegant and understated, which I loved. But as I walked into the reception hall with Mark, arm in arm, ready to celebrate our union, I heard it. A snicker from Mark's cousin, followed by a louder laugh from his aunt. Then, a hushed conversation that wasn't so hushed. "Look at her dress," I heard Mark's mother whisper to a socialite friend. "So simple. Almost like she bought it at a discount store. You'd think with all of Mark's connections, she'd have better taste." My heart sank. Mark squeezed my hand again, but still said nothing. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on the joy of the day, but the whispers and the condescending glances intensified as the night went on. At one point, during dinner, Mark's uncle stood up to give a toast. Instead of focusing on Mark and me, he launched into a long, rambling monologue about the Davenport legacy, their illustrious history, and how Mark was finally marrying up in terms of social standing, but then made a thinly veiled jab at my humble beginnings, and how I was lucky to be joining such a prominent family. The room erupted in polite, yet clearly amused, laughter. My face burned. Mark just smiled awkwardly, raising his glass. I looked at him, desperately, for some sign of outrage, some defense, but there was nothing. He was just going along with it. So, that's the situation I was in. Standing there, on what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, being openly mocked and belittled by the very people who were about to become my family. And my fiancé, the man who vowed to love and cherish me, was doing absolutely nothing. He was complicit in their cruelty. It was in that moment, as the realization of his spinelessness washed over me, that another, far more significant thought struck me. I remembered the meeting I had earlier that week, a very clandestine meeting with a consortium of international investors. They were looking to acquire a controlling stake in a struggling, but fundamentally sound, construction conglomerate. The target company? None other than Davenport Industries. My firm had been hired to facilitate the acquisition, a monumental deal valued at a staggering $950 million. My role was critical. I was the one who had meticulously vetted their financials, structured the entire deal, and was due to sign the final contracts first thing Monday morning. The Davenports, in their infinite arrogance, had no idea. They thought they were simply negotiating a strategic partnership with a much larger firm, a partnership that would inject much-needed capital into their failing business and save them from imminent bankruptcy. They were desperate, and I, the architect, was their unwitting savior. And it was then, watching Mark's family revel in their perceived superiority, as my heart broke into a million pieces, that I had to make a choice. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have let the deal go through and saved their company, despite their cruelty? Or would you have put a stop to it and allowed them to face the consequences of their actions? Tell me, what would you have done? The decision hit me with the force of a tidal wave. It wasn't about revenge, not entirely. It was about self-respect. It was about realizing that I couldn't spend my life with a man who allowed his family to treat me like this, a man who lacked the courage to stand up for the woman he supposedly loved. And if he couldn't protect me from his own family's verbal assaults, how could I ever trust him with my future, or with our potential children? As Mark's uncle continued his patronizing toast, I slowly, deliberately, removed the engagement ring from my finger. It was a beautiful ring, an heirloom from his family, but in that moment, it felt like a heavy chain. I walked over to Mark, who was still smiling awkwardly, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I placed the ring squarely in his outstretched hand, right in front of his entire family and every single guest. The uncle's voice trailed off. A hush fell over the room, the kind of silence that's so profound it's deafening. Mark looked at the ring, then at me, his eyes wide with confusion. "Sarah? What are you doing?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. I looked him dead in the eye, my voice calm, but filled with a resolve I hadn't known I possessed. "Mark," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I cannot marry into a family that treats me with such disrespect. And I certainly cannot marry a man who allows it to happen." His mother gasped. His father's jaw dropped. The whispers started again, but this time, they were about me. I ignored them. I turned to the room, addressing his family directly. "You all seem to believe you know who I am," I said, my voice gaining strength. "You've made assumptions based on my background, my quiet nature, and what you perceive as a lack of social standing. You've mocked my choices, my parents, and even my dress." I paused, letting my words hang in the air. "But you are gravely mistaken. You have no idea who I truly am." Mark's father, Mr. Davenport, finally found his voice. "Now, hold on a minute, young lady. You're making a scene. This is ridiculous." I turned to him, a small, knowing smile playing on my lips. "Is it, Mr. Davenport? Because I believe the real scene started long before tonight. But let me assure you, the consequences of your family's actions and Mark's inaction will be far more significant than a mere scene." I then looked directly at Mark, whose face was a mask of shock and bewilderment. "Mark," I said, "I regret to inform you that the strategic partnership your company was expecting to finalize on Monday will not be happening. Because I, the architect, the person responsible for facilitating that $950 million deal, have just unilaterally canceled it." The words hung in the air like a death knell. A collective gasp swept through the room. Mark's parents went from bewildered to aghast. Mark himself looked like he'd been punched in the gut, his face draining of all color. "Sarah, what are you talking about?" he stammered, his voice barely a croak. You're the architect." I nodded. "Indeed. And as of this moment, Davenport Industries will not be receiving that much-needed capital injection. You're on your own." His father, a man who had always seemed so confident, so in control, looked utterly defeated. His mother, for the first time, was speechless, her perfectly coiffed hair seeming to deflate. The realization of what I had just done, and what it meant for their company, for their family, for their entire future, slowly dawned on them. The silence returned, thick and heavy, but this time it was laced with genuine shock and horror, not condescending amusement. I took one last look at Mark, whose eyes were filled with a mixture of betrayal and dawning comprehension. He finally understood the magnitude of his family's cruelty and his own failure to protect me. I felt a pang of sadness, a brief mourning for the future I had envisioned with him, but it was quickly overshadowed by a sense of fierce liberation. I turned and walked out of the ballroom, leaving behind the stunned silence and the wreckage of their illusions. My parents, who had watched the entire exchange with a mixture of confusion and growing pride, met me at the door. My mom enveloped me in a tight hug. My dad simply squeezed my shoulder, a knowing look in his eyes. The aftermath was exactly as I expected. On Monday morning, I sent out the formal cancellation notices to all parties involved, ensuring that the deal was unequivocally dead. The Davenports' lawyers tried to threaten me, but my legal team was formidable, and every single interaction I had with Davenport Industries had been strictly professional, with all agreements iron disclosure protected. There was nothing they could do. Within a few weeks, news of Davenport Industries' severe financial troubles became public. The strategic partnership they had touted fell through, and their stock plummeted. Creditors began circling, and the company, once a symbol of old money and power, started to crumble. Mark tried to contact me numerous times. He called, he emailed, he even showed up at my office building, but I refused to see him. He left desperate voicemails, apologizing profusely, begging for forgiveness, explaining that he had been blind and stupid. He even claimed his family was now blaming him for everything. But it was too late. The trust was shattered, and the respect was gone. I heard through the grapevine that Davenport Industries eventually declared bankruptcy. Their assets were liquidated, their sprawling family estate was sold, and the Davenports, once the toast of the town, faded into obscurity, their reputation in tatters. They learned the hard way that money and social standing don't excuse cruelty, and that sometimes the quietest person in the room can hold the most power. I, on the other hand, continued to thrive. My company grew even larger. My reputation as the architect solidified. I learned a valuable lesson about true worth, about choosing partners who respect you, and about never letting anyone diminish your value. The scars of that day still remain, a reminder of a painful experience, but also of my strength. I found love again, eventually, with someone who truly respected me, cherished me, and stood by my side, always. Someone who recognized that true wealth isn't just about money, but about character, integrity, and kindness. So, that's my story. It was a brutal lesson, but one that taught me the importance of self-worth and standing up for yourself, no matter the cost. Sometimes, walking away from something that hurts you, even if it seems grand and desirable on the surface, is the most powerful thing you can do. And sometimes, those who think they are superior are the ones who have the most to lose. I still wonder if I was too harsh, too unforgiving. But then I remember the laughter, the snide remarks, and Mark's silence, and I know I made the right choice for me. Like this video if you were on my side, if you think I did the right thing. Subscribe for more stories like this, where the quiet ones get their powerful revenge. And share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comment section below. What would you have done? I'll see you all in the next story.